So picture this. It is Christmas night, 1996.
Okay.
Snow is, falling lightly over this really wealthy, picturesque neighborhood in Boulder, Colorado.
Right, a totally idyllic setting.
Exactly. And inside this massive 6,500 square foot home, a family is just, well, they're asleep after a long day of celebrating the holidays.
That's
The doors are locked, the neighborhood is completely quiet. But by morning, a 6-year-old girl is dead.
It's just, yeah, it's horrifying.
It is. And the killer, despite leaving this absolute mountain of the most baffling, contradictory evidence you could ever imagine, they seemingly never even left the house.
It's a scenario that sounds exactly like the setup for, like, an Agatha Christie novel.
Right, like the ultimate locked room mystery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the really devastating reality here is that this happened to a real family, and it completely, fundamentally fractured the nation's sense of safety.
Oh, absolutely.
And in a case that has just been totally overwhelmed by tabloid sensationalism for decades, our job today on this deep dive is to, well, to cut through all that noise.
Yes, because there is a lot of noise.
A ton of it. So we need to synthesize the raw, verified facts and understand exactly what happened. And more importantly, we need to examine why this 30-year-old case still completely breaks our understanding of criminal profiling, of forensic investigation, and really human behavior.
That is exactly the mission today. We are going to completely unpack the unsolved murder of JonBenet Ramsey.
And we aren't just, reciting a timeline of events.
No, definitely not. We are going to dissect the actual sequence of what happened. We're analyzing this incredibly strange evidence. Like there's a 2.5-page handwritten ransom note.
Which is just bizarre.
Right, and a handmade murder weapon that completely defies logic. We're going to break down the three main, completely mutually exclusive theories that have dominated the investigation.
And incredibly, we are also going to look forward to this really urgent 2025 push for advanced genetic genealogy testing.
Yes, the new testing that might finally break this wide open.
Exactly. And to do that properly, we're pulling from a massive stack of sources for you today.
A huge stack.
Yeah. So rather than just reading a list, we're going to weave together comprehensive historical overviews. We've got detailed crime scene analysis documented by CBS News and Wikipedia, and the most recent 2024 and 2025 journalistic updates.
Right, from places like Oxygen True Crime, Fox News, and actual official statements directly from the Boulder Police Department. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how this case went so completely catastrophically off the rails, we really had to start with the first 24 hours.
Right. The timeline of December 25th to December 26th, 1996.
Let's set the baseline for everyone. We have the Ramsey family. John Ramsey is the highly successful CEO of a computer company called Access Graphics.
And he had just recently received a massive executive bonus.
Right, which is an important detail for later. His wife, Patsy, is a former Miss West Virginia. She's deeply involved in the local social scene and, her children's lives.
They have 2 kids at home, 9-year-old Burke and 6-year-old JonBenet.
So on Christmas Day, they attend a holiday party at the home of their friends, Fleet and Priscilla White.
And it's a completely normal, festive family evening. There is literally nothing out of the ordinary reported by anyone at that party.
Nothing at all. They leave the Whites' home, and according to the parents, JonBenet falls asleep in the car on the short ride back to their house.
John carries her inside and puts her straight to bed.
Yeah, she is actually still wearing her Christmas outfit. A white long-sleeve top, a red turtleneck, and black velvet pants.
And the family has an early flight the next morning to their vacation home in Michigan, so everyone just goes to sleep. That is the established reality before everything just, shatters.
Right. And if you're listening to this, I want you to hold on to that image of a quiet house, because then we jump to 5:52 a.m. on December 26th.
Patsy Ramsey wakes up.
She comes downstairs to get ready for this early flight, and she finds a handwritten ransom note sitting on the staircase.
She immediately calls 911.
And the police arrive at the house at 5:59 a.m., 7 minutes later.
And this right here is where the timeline of the murder investigation officially begins. But tragically, it's also exactly where the chance of solving it might have been permanently destroyed.
Yeah, it is really hard to overstate the magnitude of the errors made in those initial hours.
Oh, it's mind-blowing. When we look at standard forensic procedure, the absolute first rule of arriving at a potential crime scene, especially kidnapping, right, where the victim's location is totally unknown, is to freeze the environment.
You secure the perimeter.
Exactly. You log every single person who enters or exits, and you touch absolutely nothing.
But That's not what happened here.
Not even close. The responding officers only cordoned off JonBenét's bedroom. The rest of this massive, 6,500 square foot house was left completely unsecured.
It was essentially treated like a public gathering space, wasn't it?
It was, because the Ramseys were understandably terrified. They called over their friends. Victim advocates arrived. Even their minister came over to offer support.
Wow. So you have a house full of people pacing, crying, comforting each other. I mean, from a human perspective, it makes total sense.
Right, of course.
You want your support system around you when you think your child has been taken. But from a forensic perspective, what does that actually do to the environment?
It obliterates it entirely. In forensic science, there is this foundational concept called Locard's exchange principle.
Right.
It dictates that every contact leaves a trace. Whenever two objects come into contact, there is a mutual exchange of matter.
So if you walk into a room,
You leave skin cells, hair, fabric fibers from your clothing, and you take microscopic particles from the room with you. By allowing civilians to roam freely through the house, they were introducing foreign DNA everywhere.
and destroying potential footprints.
Exactly. And it wasn't just walking around. People were actively cleaning the kitchen countertops.
Wait, I need to stop you there. They were cleaning the kitchen
Yeah.
in a house where a child was just kidnapped.
Yes. Friends were trying to be helpful, trying to keep the parents calm and occupied. They were wiping down surfaces, using the bathrooms, moving items around to make coffee.
That is, just by wiping down those counters, they were potentially erasing the kidnapper's fingerprints.
Or trace evidence of how they moved through the house, yeah. The entire microenvironment of the crime scene was completely rewritten by well-meaning friends.
It's just mind-boggling. And then there is the search of the house itself. Because the police did conduct a cursory search early on, right?
I did, yeah.
Officer Rick French does a sweep of the house looking for signs of forced entry or maybe an exit route the kidnapper took, and he goes down into the basement.
He does, and this is honestly one of the most haunting details of the entire case. Officer French comes to a specific door in the basement.
Okay.
It's secured by a wooden latch on the outside of the doorframe, high up. He pauses in front of it, but he doesn't open it.
Why wouldn't he open a closed door in a kidnapping search?
His logic, which he later explained to investigators, was that he was looking for the kidnapper's exit route. He figured if a kidnapper fled through that door, they couldn't possibly have latched it from the outside once they were gone.
Okay, but hold on. Let's think about that logic. The latch was holding the door closed from the outside,
Right.
which means whatever was inside that room was locked in, not out.
Precisely. And this is a classic example of cognitive bias in law enforcement, specifically what we call anchoring bias. The officer was anchored to the idea of a kidnapping.
He was looking for an exit.
He wasn't looking for a body. Because of that completely flawed assumption, JonBenét's body, which was lying just on the other side of that very door, remained undiscovered for hours while the house above filled with people.
Which leads us to 1:00 p.m. Detective Linda Arndt is at the house. They're waiting for the kidnapper to call, as the ransom note explicitly promised they would.
But the call never comes.
The deadline passes. The tension in the house is just unbearable. So, Detective Arndt asks John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White to search the house to see if, quote, anything seemed amiss.
It is a decision that has been heavily scrutinized by criminal profilers for decades.
I bet.
You are asking the father of the victim, who, from a strict investigative standpoint, should automatically be considered a person of interest in any domestic incident until cleared.
Right, that's just standard procedure.
You're asking him to conduct an unescorted search of a potential crime scene.
So John and Fleet go down to the basement. John goes straight to that exact same latched door that Officer French ignored hours earlier.
He opens it.
And he finds JonBenet. She is lying on the floor. She is wrapped in a white blanket. Her mouth is covered with duct tape. Her wrists are tied with a nylon cord.
And John, reacting as literally any horrified, grieving father probably would, doesn't freeze.
Right. He doesn't back away and yell for the police.
No. He picks up his daughter's body, he rips the tape off her mouth, and he carries her upstairs to the living room, laying her down on the floor.
And in that single tragic moment, the physical evidence was compromised beyond repair.
Absolutely. By moving the body, removing the tape, and bringing her into the highly contaminated living area upstairs, the immediate micro-crime scene around the body was completely destroyed.
The exact positioning of the body on the floor.
Gone. The trace evidence that might have been lying underneath her, the exact state of the bindings, all of it was hopelessly scrambled before a forensics team ever even laid eyes on her in situ.
So let me get this straight. It's like a surgeon dropping their scalpel on a dirty operating room floor, casually picking it up, wiping it on their sleeve, and starting a heart transplant.
That is a very apt analogy, yeah.
It completely defies everything we know about protocol. How on earth could the police allow a father to search a potential crime scene unescorted?
It defies basic logic, yes. But we really have to contextualize this, because understanding why this happened is crucial for anyone studying this case.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The Boulder Police Department in 1996 was not dealing with a high volume of complex homicides. Boulder was a relatively safe, affluent college town. They were completely unaccustomed to this level of criminal complexity.
Right.
And perhaps more importantly, they were dealing with a very wealthy, very prominent family. In law enforcement, there is often this psychological deference that happens in those situations, whether it's conscious or unconscious,
I mean, they were intimidated.
or just overly respectful. You don't want to treat the CEO of a massive company like a suspect while his daughter is missing. You treat him like a victim. You give him the benefit of the doubt.
And that deference led to procedural paralysis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They didn't want to be heavy-handed, and it cost them the crime scene.
Wow. Okay, so the house is contaminated, the body has been moved, the police are now entirely on the back foot. The pristine physical environment is gone, which means they have to rely entirely on the physical evidence left behind.
And this brings us to the evidence itself, which is where this case goes from tragic to absolutely bizarre.
With the house compromised, investigators turn their attention to the note.
The ransom note is arguably the most analyzed, debated, and perplexing piece of physical evidence in modern criminal history. It defies almost every known profile of a kidnapping ransom demand.
Let's break down exactly what it is. First of all, it is 2.5 pages long, handwritten.
That alone is unusual.
Very. And the specific details are chilling. It demands exactly $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return.
And that number is not random at all. It is highly specific. That $118,000 was almost precisely the amount of John Ramsey's recent executive bonus at Access Graphics.
Which immediately sets off alarm bells. I mean, how does a random, hardened kidnapper know a private executive bonus amount?
It's highly improbable.
That immediately suggests an inside job, or at least someone who has been intimately digging into his personal finances. The note claims to be from a, quote, group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. It warns them not to talk to the police, says they are under constant scrutiny, and it's signed with the letters SBTC.
But then we look at the physical anomalies of the note itself. The paper wasn't brought to the house by some criminal mastermind. It was written inside the house.
Wait, really? Inside?
Yes. The forensic investigators matched the paper to a legal pad belonging to the Ramseys, which was found inside the home.
Oh my God.
The pen used to write the note was also found in the home, placed back where it belonged. They even found a practice draft, like a false start, still in the house.
Are you serious?
Yes. This means the author sat down inside the home with the family asleep just upstairs and composed a 2.5-page essay.
Wait, my understanding of adrenaline is that it completely destroys fine motor skills. If I'm breaking into a house to commit a kidnapping, my heart is pounding out of my chest.
Absolutely. Your sympathetic nervous system is in pure fight-or-flight mode.
My hands would be shaking too much to write a Post-it note, let alone sit down at a kitchen counter, draft a practice run, and then neatly write a multi-page manifesto. Doesn't that suggest someone who is incredibly comfortable in the house?
It certainly does.
Someone who knew they had time and wasn't terrified of waking anyone up?
That is exactly the physiological question that has haunted profilers for years. The reality of a home invasion kidnapping is chaos and speed. You want to get in, secure the victim, and get out before the environment changes.
Exactly.
Writing 2.5 pages neatly suggests a level of calm and a perception of time that is entirely inconsistent with a stranger in a hostile environment. Furthermore, the language used in the note is bizarrely cinematic.
Oh, right. The movie quotes.
Yes.
If you read the text, the note says things like, "Don't try to grow a brain, John, and you are not the only fat cat around."
It literally lifts phrases directly from popular action movies of the era. Speed, ransom, ruthless people, Dirty Harry.
It reads like a Hollywood scriptwriter's idea of what a kidnapper would say, not what a real foreign faction would write.
Which led many investigators and the FBI profilers who consulted on the case to conclude that the note was entirely staged. It was viewed as a theatrical prop, designed to point the investigation outward, far away from the house and the people inside it.
Okay, so the physical house was compromised. The note is baffling. So the medical examiner's table became the only pristine crime scene left. And what they found there immediately complicated things even further.
Right.
Let's talk about the autopsy and the murder weapon. The official cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma.
Meaning she had a massive skull fracture from a violent blow to the head with a heavy object.
But she was also strangled.
The sequencing of those injuries is critical to understanding the timeline of the murder. The medical evidence suggested she was struck on the head first. The blow was incredibly severe. It would have rendered her deeply unconscious immediately, if not eventually proving fatal on its own. But the actual cause of death, the mechanism that ended her life, was the strangulation.
And the weapon used for the strangulation was a garrote. But again, this wasn't some specialized assassin's tool brought in from the outside.
No, it wasn't.
It was constructed using a length of nylon cord and a broken piece of wood, which was identified as a handle from one of Patsy Ramsey's own art paintbrushes.
Utilizing materials found inside the home once again, but the construction of the garrote is where the mechanics get highly technical and deeply perplexing.
How so?
The nylon cord was tied around the paintbrush handle using a very complex, specialized knot. Investigators and forensic analysts noted that this type of intricate knotting requires significant manual dexterity and tension to create.
So if you're listening and picturing this, think about trying to tie a complex knot while wearing thick winter gloves. Yeah. You just can't do it. You need tactile feedback.
Exactly. It is highly unlikely it could have been tied by someone wearing gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints, which means whoever tied it had to be using their bare hands, manipulating the cord and the wood with extreme precision.
That is a huge detail.
It is. And while we're discussing the autopsy, it revealed something deeply disturbing that wasn't widely discussed in the early frantic days of the media coverage. There was evidence of prior chronic sexual abuse.
Yes. This wasn't just a singular, horrific event that night. The medical examiner found physical evidence indicating that JonBenet had been subjected to ongoing sexual abuse over a period of time.
Which completely reframes the psychological profile of the perpetrator. It strongly implies a long-term proximity to the child, rather than a random intruder who picked a house at random on Christmas night.
It adds a whole layer of systemic darkness to the case. And as if the timeline wasn't confusing enough, the autopsy uncovers what is often referred to as the pineapple mystery.
Right, because up until now, the parents' timeline is that JonBenet fell asleep in the car, was carried to bed, and never woke up.
But the science says otherwise.
What's fascinating here is how a single microscopic piece of biological evidence can completely dismantle an established narrative. The autopsy revealed partially digested vegetable or fruit material, which may represent pineapple in JonBenet's stomach, down into her upper intestine.
Wow.
Based on the biological state of digestion, the medical examiner concluded she had eaten it a few hours before her death.
But the parents stated explicitly to the police that they did not feed her pineapple when they got home. They said she was asleep.
Yet, crime scene photos taken in the kitchen that morning show a bowl of pineapple sitting on the table with a spoon in it.
And didn't they find fingerprints on it?
Yes. The police reported finding Patsy Ramsey's fingerprints on that bowl.
The digestive biology fundamentally fractures the narrative that JonBenet slept through the night. It physically proves she was awake, in the kitchen, eating a snack, relatively shortly before the head strike and the strangulation occurred.
So you have to ask, how did she get downstairs? Who gave her the pineapple? And why do the parents claim absolutely no knowledge of this event taking place?
It's just contradiction after contradiction. An intruder who uses the family's things, a ransom note that asks for a specific bonus amount but quotes movies, a child who is supposed to be asleep but was eating fruit in the kitchen.
It's a logistical nightmare.
It really is. So looking at this completely chaotic, contaminated scene and this wildly bizarre evidence, investigators and the public essentially split into factions. The evidence was like a Rorschach test. You could look at it and see whatever you wanted to see.
Which brings us to the three main theories that have defined this case for nearly 3 decades.
Let's get into it. With the house thoroughly contaminated and the behavior inside the house making absolutely no sense for kidnapping, some investigators were forced to look outward to the only pristine piece of evidence left pointing to the outside world, a broken basement window.
Right.
This window birthed the hypothesis that divided the town, and it leads us directly into Theory 1, the intruder hypothesis.
The intruder theory is the idea that an unknown person, completely unaffiliated with the Ramsey family, broke into the home, committed the murder, wrote the note, and escaped into the night.
And this theory has very strong, highly credentialed proponents. most notably the legendary homicide detective Lou Smit.
Yes. Snett was brought out of retirement specifically to help the district attorney's office look at the case with fresh eyes.
And Lou Smit didn't just pull this theory out of thin air to protect the family. There is actual, tangible, physical evidence supporting it.
Absolutely.
First, let's talk about the entry point. Investigators found a broken window in the basement. Directly beneath that window, someone had positioned a hard-sided suitcase.
Smith theorized that the intruder came through that window, stepping down onto the suitcase to get inside.
Right. His theory was that the intruder intended to use the suitcase to carry JonBenet out of the house, but for some reason abandoned the plan and killed her in the basement instead.
It provides a plausible mechanical entry point, but then we have the absolute forensic cornerstone of the intruder theory, the DNA.
This is massive.
During the examination of JonBenet's underwear, and later found on multiple items of her clothing, investigators recovered trace DNA from an unidentified male.
This is huge. If you're an investigator, an unidentified male profile on the victim's clothing is the smoking gun.
It is the most significant hurdle to any theory that accuses the family. This DNA profile was entered into databases. It was tested against John Ramsey, Burke Ramsey, and dozens of family, friends, and persons of interest who had been in the house.
Yeah.
It matched none of them. Former FBI profiler Candace DeLong has actually gone on record stating that when you find the exact same unidentified DNA profile across multiple surfaces and items of clothing on a victim, standard forensic logic dictates it almost certainly belongs to the killer.
And it wasn't just invisible DNA. They found a boot print in the basement near the body. It was made by a high-tech brand boot.
And the police scoured John Ramsey's closet. He did not own high-tech boots.
They also found a strange piece of rope in a guest bedroom upstairs that the Ramseys explicitly stated didn't belong to them.
Plus, we have to look at the broader context of Boulder at the time. It wasn't quite the pristine, untouched bubble it appeared to be in the glossy magazines. There were over 100 burglaries reported in the Ramseys' specific neighborhood in the months leading up to the murder.
Wow, 100.
Yes. Furthermore, law enforcement identified 38 registered sex offenders living within a 2-mile radius of the Ramsey home.
So you have a broken window, a suitcase position to step on, unidentified male DNA, a mystery boot print, a piece of foreign rope, and a neighborhood with a proven history of break-ins and known predators.
It's a lot of circumstantial and physical evidence pointing out.
When you stack it up like that, the intruder theory sounds incredibly compelling.
Smith compiled a massive list of hundreds of potential suspects based on these parameters. People like Michael Helgoth, who died of an apparent suicide shortly after the murder and had reportedly made threatening comments. And Gary Howard Oliva, a registered sex offender who was later arrested on child pornography charges and had a bizarre obsession with JonBenet. The district attorney's office, looking at this pile of evidence, eventually leaned heavily into the intruder theory.
But wait, I have to push back here, because I've seen the crime scene photos of that basement window. The one Lou Smit said the intruder climbed through.
The cobweb.
Yes. There was an intact spider cobweb stretching right across the corner of that broken window frame. How on earth does a full-grown man wearing winter clothes and heavy high-tech boots squeeze his entire body through a relatively small basement window without disturbing a delicate spider web or brushing away the layer of dust on the sill?
And that is exactly where you have to apply critical thinking and look at the whole picture. The physical logistics of the intruder theory are incredibly strained.
Highly strained.
Yes, an intruder explains the unidentified DNA and the boot print, but it completely struggles to explain the behavioral evidence inside the house.
Right. If we go back to the physiological reality of a break-in, an intruder breaks in to kidnap a girl for ransom, but instead of taking her, they kill her.
And they take the time to use the family's own paintbrush from an art kit to meticulously craft a garrote.
Right. They find a notepad and pen and spend 20 minutes writing a movie, quote, filled ransom note.
And during all of this, the breaking of the window, the head strike, the strangulation, the wandering around finding paper, the family dog doesn't bark, the child doesn't scream.
Though to be fair, one neighbor across the street, Melody Stanton, did report hearing a sharp child scream around midnight, but no one inside the actual house woke up.
It requires an intruder who is a walking paradox. They are simultaneously a bumbling amateur, leaving trace evidence, changing plans mid-crime, relying on materials they happen to find on site.
And a forensic mastermind who manages to enter and exit a house without waking a dog, leaving no discernible exit trail in the snow, and somehow magically avoiding disturbing a cobweb.
Exactly. Because the logistical mechanics of an intruder doing all that were so nearly impossible to reconcile, the Boulder Police Department initially looked right past the broken window.
They focused almost exclusively on the people who were already inside the locked house. The evidence pointing inside birthed Theory 2, Patsy Ramsey and the cover-up hypothesis.
Because the intruder theory contained those massive behavioral and logical gaps, the early years of the investigation, driven heavily by the police rather than the DA, were dominated by the suspicion that the parents, and specifically Patsy, were involved.
The theory essentially paints a picture of a tragic accident that escalated into a grotesque cover-up. It goes like this. Sometime in the middle of night, there was an altercation.
Perhaps JonBenet wet the bed, which was documented by pediatricians as an ongoing issue she was struggling with.
Right. The theory suggests that Patsy, exhausted, stressed from the holidays, and rushing to pack for an early flight, snapped. She struck JonBenet in a sudden fit of rage, perhaps shoving her into something hard.
And realizing the severity of the massive head wound and thinking her daughter was dead or dying, Patsy and John panicked. To protect their family's reputation and avoid prison, they staged the rest of the crime scene to cover up the domestic accident.
In this harrowing scenario, the strangulation wasn't the primary method of murder. It was a horrifying staging mechanism.
Right, they created the garrote to make it look like a sadistic kidnapping. The use of her own paintbrush, the use of the household notepad and pen, these point to someone utilizing what they had immediately at hand in a state of sheer panic, not an intruder who came prepared with a weapon and a note.
And the biggest piece of evidence the police leaned on to support this was the ransom note. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation analyzed the handwriting and stated there were, quote, indications that Patsy wrote the note.
However, we must be very careful with how we interpret forensic linguistics and handwriting analysis.
Right. Indications isn't exactly proof.
Exactly. Indications is not a definitive scientific match. Handwriting analysis is inherently subjective. In fact, during a much later federal defamation lawsuit, a judge ruled that it was highly unlikely Patsy wrote the note.
Really?
Yes. The judge cited 6 independent, certified handwriting experts who examined the nuances of the lettering and entirely cleared her. The science of handwriting analysis became a battle of the experts, offering no solid ground.
But the suspicion in the late 90s was so intense, the public pressure was so heavy, that in 1999, a grand jury was actually convened in Colorado. And they spent over a year looking at all this evidence.
The contamination, the note, the timeline.
And they voted a true bill to indict both John and Patsy Ramsey.
They did, but it's vital to look at exactly what they indicted them for. They didn't indict them for first-degree premeditated murder.
What was it for then?
The indictment was for 2 counts of child abuse resulting in death, and for placing a child in a situation that posed a threat to her life, effectively hindering the investigation of an unidentified person who committed the murder.
Ah.
The language suggested the grand jury believed the parents were intimately involved in the cover-up and the staging, even if they couldn't definitively prove who delivered the fatal blow.
But they were never arrested. The public saw the headlines, but no mugshots. Why?
Because the district attorney at the time, Alex Hunter, refused to sign the indictment.
If you're listening and you aren't a lawyer, you're probably asking, how does that happen? A grand jury of citizens says indict, and one DA just says no.
It comes down to a fundamental concept in the justice system, the burden of proof.
Okay, but break that down.
A grand jury operates on the standard of probable cause. Meaning, is it more likely than not that a crime occurred and these specific people are connected to it? It's a relatively low bar.
Right.
But a district attorney has to take that case into a courtroom and prove it to a jury at trial. And the standard at trial is beyond a reasonable doubt.
That's a huge difference.
It is. Hunter looked at the completely contaminated crime scene where friends were cleaning counters. He looked at the contradictory handwriting analyses. And most importantly, he looked at that unidentified male DNA.
Which the defense would obviously use.
Exactly. He concluded that any competent defense attorney would use that DNA to introduce reasonable doubt, and he could never secure a conviction. He felt the evidence was simply too murky to take to trial.
And from a purely scientific standpoint, history eventually backed him up on the DNA issue. Fast forward to 2008. There are massive advancements in what's called touch DNA technology.
This was revolutionary.
This allowed investigators to go back to the evidence and get a much clearer, more robust profile of that unknown male DNA found on JonBenet's clothing. And the district attorney's office stated that this definitively cleared the Ramsey family.
The new DA, Mary Lacy, even wrote a highly publicized official letter of apology to John Ramsey.
She formally exonerated them based on the science.
She did. But even that exoneration is hotly debated in forensic circles today. Later investigators, like A. James Kohler and former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner, have pointed out the flaws in relying solely on touch DNA.
Let's explain touch DNA because I think people confuse it with a drop of blood or a hair follicle.
Yeah.
I like to think of touch DNA like glitter at a craft store.
That is an excellent analogy. We shed microscopic skin cells constantly. If I shake your hand, my skin cells are on you. If you then touch a table, my skin cells transfer to that table, even though I never touched it.
Right, that is transfer DNA.
The touch DNA found on the underwear was incredibly sensitive. Critics argue that the DNA found could simply be harmless transfer DNA, maybe from a factory worker in Asia who manufactured the underwear, or someone who brushed against the package in the department store before Patsy bought it.
Wow, so it might not even be related to the crime.
In fact, Kohler revealed in his book that investigators actually found 6 different profiles of unknown individuals on various items of evidence. Relying entirely on microscopic, easily transferred touch DNA to completely clear the parents is seen by some forensic experts as a massive, scientifically flawed overreach.
Here's where it gets really interesting and honestly incredibly tragic. Patsy Ramsey never saw that 2008 exoneration letter.
No, she didn't.
She died of ovarian cancer in 2006 at the age of 49. She spent the last decade of her life mourning her violently murdered daughter while simultaneously being publicly branded as a child killer by half the country, stalked by paparazzi, and mocked on late-night television.
It highlights the profound human cost of an unsolved, highly publicized crime. The justice system is clinical, but the fallout is deeply personal. If she was innocent, she endured unimaginable psychological torture in her final years.
And if she was involved, she took the truth to her grave, leaving behind a permanently fractured legacy. With the parents officially cleared by the DA, but the public and some investigators still wanting answers, the spotlight shifted. If the logistics ruled out an intruder and the DNA exonerated the parents, who else was left in the house?
Which brings us to the third person who was asleep upstairs.
Theory 3, Burke Ramsey and the false confession distractions.
Burke was 9 years old at the time of the murder. Early on, the police and the district attorney's office explicitly, repeatedly stated that Burke was not a suspect.
Right, he was interviewed extensively as a witness, but law enforcement maintained he was not involved in the crime.
But the internet, armchair detectives, and eventually a major television network decided otherwise.
In 2016, CBS aired a high-budget documentary series featuring a panel of retired investigators and experts who review the case files. Their conclusion: they posited that Burke and JonBenet got into a fight in the kitchen.
Remember the pineapple?
Yes. They theorized Burke was eating the pineapple, JonBenet snatched a piece, and in a moment of sudden, explosive sibling anger, Burke hit her in the head with a heavy flashlight that was found on the kitchen counter.
It's important to clarify the intent of this theory. It suggests the blow was accidental or a flash of childhood anger, not premeditated murder.
Right.
But because the head wound was so severe, the theory suggests John and Patsy panicked. To protect their only surviving child from being swept into the criminal justice system and facing public ruin, they engaged in an elaborate, grotesque staging of the scene.
They created the garrote, wrote the ransom note, and broke the window to invent an intruder narrative and shield Burke.
It's a theory that attempts to tie up all the loose ends. It explains why the parents would stage a scene with household items. It explains why there's no intruder footprint upstairs in the dust. And it explains why the pineapple is so important to the timeline.
But the fallout from that documentary was absolutely nuclear.
Oh, because you are accusing a living person of murder on national television. Burke Ramsey, who had lived his entire life in the shadow of this tragedy, sued CBS for defamation.
And if you understand defamation law in high-profile cases, you have to prove not just that the information was false, but that the network acted with actual malice or reckless disregard for the truth.
Burke sought $750 million in damages, arguing they destroyed his reputation for ratings.
What happened with the lawsuit?
The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court in 2019 for an undisclosed sum. Media companies often settle to avoid the discovery process and the unpredictability of a jury, but the message was clear. Burke vehemently denies any involvement, and legally the courts and law enforcement agree with him.
He has never been charged, and the Boulder police reiterated he's not a suspect.
Exactly.
It just shows how desperate people are for a narrative that makes sense. We crave a neat ending, even if it means accusing a 9-year-old boy. And speaking of desperate narratives that feed the public frenzy, we have to talk about the John Mark Karr fiasco.
Yes, that was a wild turn of events.
In August 2006, the case explodes back onto the front pages of every newspaper in the world. A 41-year-old schoolteacher named John Mark Karr is arrested in Thailand. He confesses to the murder.
He explicitly says he was with JonBenet when she died, and it was an accident.
This is a textbook example of the immense dangers of high-profile, sensationalized cases. The media went into an absolute frenzy. They thought they had the guy.
He was extradited back to the United States on a private jet, drinking champagne, treated almost like a dark celebrity. But when law enforcement actually looked at his confession, the entire thing fell apart completely.
Wait, if someone confesses to a murder, how does it fall apart? Why would someone confess to a crime they didn't commit?
False confessions happen more often than people think, especially in highly publicized cases. People with severe psychological issues or an obsessive fixation on a case will confess for notoriety.
How do police prove it's false?
The police test a confession by looking for corroborating non-public physical evidence. Karr's DNA was tested against the trace DNA found on JonBenet's clothing. It wasn't a match. In his confession, he claimed he had drugged her to keep her quiet, but the autopsy definitively showed absolutely no drugs in her system. He had absolutely no verifiable connection to Boulder, Colorado, or the Ramsey family.
So he was just a guy who read too many news articles and wanted to insert himself into the story.
Exactly. He was a man with a disturbing obsession who fabricated a narrative. It completely derailed the actual investigation, wasted enormous state and federal resources, and most tragically, it traumatized the Ramsey family all over again, giving them false hope and then ripping it away.
It proves that a confession, without corroborating physical evidence, is meaningless in a case with this much public exposure.
Definitely.
So if you're keeping track at home, we have 3 theories. Intruder, Patsy cover-up, Burke cover-up. None of them perfectly fit the evidence. We have false confessions. We have severely contaminated crime scenes. We have DNA that might just be factory glitter.
It's a mess.
For 28 years, this case has been a brick wall. But then we hit 2024 and 2025. And suddenly, there is movement. Real, tangible, scientific movement. Let's talk about the 2025 push for answers and the science of genetic genealogy.
This is where the story shifts from a historical tragedy of errors to an active, modern forensic science investigation.
Finally.
After decades of publicly criticizing the Boulder Police Department for incompetence, an 81-year-old John Ramsey is making what might be his final massive push for justice. In January 2025, he secured an almost 2-hour face-to-face meeting with the new Boulder Police Chief, Stephen Redfern.
And John Ramsey didn't go in there to yell or threaten lawsuits. He actually praised the new leadership. He said for the first time in decades, he feels they have competent leadership who are actually committed to solving this, rather than just defending the department's past mistakes.
And he didn't just bring his lawyers to this meeting, he brought his own private DNA expert.
Because the entire conversation now revolves around investigative genetic genealogy, or IgG. This is the exact same groundbreaking technology that was used to finally catch the Golden State Killer in 2018.
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's break this down because I think a lot of people hear DNA and assume it's all the same. Explain to me, and a listener, how IgG is functionally different from the STR DNA profiling they did in 2008 that supposedly cleared the family.
Traditional DNA testing STR profiling is like looking for a matching fingerprint in a filing cabinet. You take the DNA found at the scene and you look for an exact match in a criminal database like CODIS.
Right.
If the killer has never been arrested for a felony, their DNA isn't in that filing cabinet. You just get a blank result, a dead end.
So what does IgG do?
IgG completely circumvents that. It takes that unidentified DNA profile and runs it through commercial genealogy databases like GEmatch or Family Tree DNA, where millions of regular law-abiding people have voluntarily uploaded their DNA to find their heritage or build family trees.
So even if the killer isn't in any police database, if their third cousin took a DNA test to find out if they are Irish, the police can find a connection.
Exactly. You find distant relatives. Then, specialized genealogists build massive family trees, working backward to common ancestors and then forward, slowly narrowing down the branches until they find the one specific person who fits the demographic, age, and geographic profile of the killer at the time of the crime.
That's incredible.
John Ramsey noted in a recent interview that laboratories using IgG have a 70% chance of solving a cold case like this in a matter of months if they have a good sample.
70%. That's an incredible statistic. So what's the holdup? Why haven't they done this yet? John specifically wants 4 items retested using this new tech. The ransom note, the blanket JonBenet was wrapped in, the suitcase found under the window, and most importantly, the Gardo.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the garrote is the holy grail of physical evidence in this case. As we discussed earlier, that knot was incredibly complex. It had to be tied with bare hands using significant force and friction.
So the killer's skin cells are almost certainly deeply embedded in the fibers of that nylon cord.
Exactly.
So why not just test it tomorrow and get the answer?
Because IgG requires a slightly larger and higher quality DNA sample than traditional STR testing. And the remaining physical samples on the garrote and the clothing are microscopic. They are decades old.
Wow.
In forensic science, DNA extraction is often a destructive process. If the lab attempts to extract the DNA for IgG and the extraction fails, or the sample is too degraded, the sample is consumed. It's gone forever.
Oh, wow. So they only get one shot.
Yes. Law enforcement has to weigh an agonizing risk. Do we destroy the absolute last piece of physical evidence we have, or do we wait for the technology to become even more sensitive?
The stakes are impossibly high. John Ramsey is so determined to take that risk, he even publicly asked President Donald Trump to intervene to ensure the Boulder police get the federal resources, the best labs, and the political pressure they need to push this testing through immediately.
And for their part, the Boulder Police Department, under Chief Redfern, has stated publicly that they are not ignoring this. They maintain this case remains a top priority.
That's good to hear.
They aren't sitting on their hands waiting for a confession. They have investigated over 21,016 tips over the years. They have interviewed over 1,000 people across 19 states.
That is a massive undertaking.
They are actively consulting with private, cutting-edge labs and waiting for the technology to evolve just a fraction more to ensure that when they finally test that garrote, they get an undeniable result, rather than destroying the evidence.
It feels like we are standing on the edge of a cliff with this case. We've unpacked the timeline and the catastrophic procedural mistakes of the first 24 hours that doomed the initial investigation.
We've looked at the bizarre, contradictory evidence of the movie, quote, ransom note and the undigested pineapple.
We've debated the logistical nightmares of the 3 main theories. But why does this matter to you, the listener, today, nearly 30 years later?
It's a question we have to ask.
It matters because JonBenet Ramsey represents the ultimate violation of the social contract. It's the terrifying idea that even in a safe, wealthy neighborhood tucked into your own bed on Christmas night with your family sleeping just down the hall, the unimaginable can happen.
It truly is a masterclass in why preserving a crime scene is paramount, no matter who the victim is, and how the relentless evolution of DNA technology might finally, after 3 decades of pain, correct the mistakes of the past.
Before we close, is there any final thought you want to leave the listener with?
Yes. I want to leave you with one final, deeply chilling detail to mull over as you think about everything we've discussed today. We've spent an hour talking about the brutal, unspeakable violence of this crime. The massive, fatal skull fracture, the intricately tied garrote, the tragic evidence of chronic abuse. But remember how JonBenet was actually found by her father in that windowless basement room? She wasn't discarded like trash. She wasn't left haphazardly on the cold floor. She was wrapped carefully in a soft white blanket.
Wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Not thrown aside, but swaddled. Tucked in. Ask yourself, as you weigh the theories, does a random hardened intruder panicked and fleeing a botched kidnapping stop to tuck in their victim? Or does that intimate, caring, deeply personal gesture point a finger straight back inside that house?
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.